Chapter 194. The deep well was circular in shape and could accommodate one person. The blue stones that were used to make the well were cold to the touch, chilling to the bone. Han Shuo stood beside the deep well and could feel the rich water yuan qi in the deep well. Perhaps it was because the two cold auras had sensed the presence of a living person, but they had already begun to stir in the deep well. In such a place, there was a deep well with a place of extreme water below. This made Han Shuo ecstatic in his surprise. If the 5 elemental corpses were all refined, they would form a great formation that would have an extremely amazing power. Now that Han Shuo had found the place of extreme earth and extreme wood, if he added this place of extreme water, he would be one step closer to success. As Han Shuo was secretly rejoicing, Phoebe suddenly frowned and said, "It seems to be a little colder. You said this is a place of extreme water. What do you mean?" 2 bone-piercing cold air suddenly spread out from the deep well. The originally calm deep well suddenly gurgled and splashed water. Clouds of white mist suddenly floated out from the deep well and scattered in the courtyard like clusters of clouds. "It's here!" Han Shuo snorted coldly and reached out to grab Phoebe. He said solemnly, "The water demon has come out to cause trouble. Be careful." The water yuan qi in the place of extreme water was very rich. If someone drowned in such a place, their soul would not immediately dissipate into the world. With the nourishment of the water yuan qi, as long as the soul knew how to absorb even a little bit, it would form a strange existence called the water demon. When the water demon absorbed the water yuan qi, the power of the soul would be greatly enhanced. It could use its special ability to manipulate the yuan qi in the place of extreme water and attack any living beings that approached. Han Shuo had already understood all of this information when he learned about the refining method of the 5 elemental corpses. Therefore, after arriving here, when Han Shuo sensed the existence of 2 cold auras in the deep well, he immediately understood that there must be 2 water demons forming inside. However, Han Shuo still did not understand why the little skull was able to sense this place. What was there that could attract him? Little Skull held the bone knife in his hand and stood next to the well. His empty eye sockets looked into the well. No one knew what he was waiting for or what he was planning to do. The water vapor in the deep well spread to the courtyard, and the white fog was thick. The surrounding scenery was affected by the fog and suddenly became blurry. The water vapor also seemed to carry a cold aura, and the temperature in the already cold weather suddenly plummeted. "I can't see anything clearly." At this moment, Phoebe cried out in alarm. "This is the water curtain formed by the water demon's control of the water yuan qi. They will attack us under the cover of the water curtain." Han Shuo's calm voice came from the side, calming Phoebe's slightly chaotic heart. Phoebe's eyesight was only at the level of an ordinary person. Even if she cultivated qi, it was only slightly brighter than ordinary people. Compared to a demonic practitioner like Han Shuo who had experienced the cruel training of his body, she was naturally far inferior. Therefore, when her eyesight was obstructed, Han Shuo's pair of starry eyes were not affected at all. In the white fog, there seemed to be silver lightning flashing in Han Shuo's eyes as he calmly surveyed the surroundings. Suddenly, the bubbling water in the deep well burst out like a fountain. These crystal-clear water streams seemed to have a life of their own as they formed strips and entangled Han Shuo and Phoebe. A cold and gloomy aura overflowed from the deep well. Even with the strength of Han Shuo's body, he couldn't help but feel a little cold. The strips formed by the water were between liquid and solid. Like soft eels, they reached out to grab Han Shuo and Phoebe's bodies. "You're courting death." Han Shuo grinned. His smile seemed a little cruel. Red devil flames suddenly appeared in his hands. Like an evil fire that could burn everything, it suddenly stood in front of Han Shuo and Phoebe. As soon as the red devil flames appeared, the surrounding cold aura sizzled and emitted heat waves. The scorching hot aura spread to the surroundings, causing Phoebe's body to immediately feel warm. Hundreds of eel-like strips approached the red devil flames that Han Shuo had set up. Before they could land on the devil flames, they had already melted into water vapor. 2 unpleasant low cries, like the last cries of a drowning person, suddenly came from the deep well. 2 blood-red shadows suddenly shot out from the deep well. The 2 shadows seemed to be formed from blood as they constantly twisted and deformed in the air. Finally, they formed the figures of a man and a woman. However, shadows were still shadows and didn't have real appearances. Blood-water demons. Han Shuo was shocked as he looked at the 2 blood-red shadows in astonishment. Water demons lived in places of extreme water. If they did evil and killed many living beings, then they would absorb the blood of these living beings. Blood was also a liquid and had the same properties as water. The boiling blood of living beings on the verge of death also had a strange power. Water demons would absorb the power contained in their blood. When the power of the blood absorbed was large enough, water demons could become even more vicious and vicious blood-water demons. After water demons became blood-water demons, not only could they control the power of water origin energy in places of extreme water, but they could also control the blood of living beings with flesh and blood. They were very difficult to deal with. Therefore, when Han Shuo saw that there were already 2 blood-water demons in front of him, he was immediately very surprised. Blood-water demons were different from other bloodthirsty monsters. Because they had water power to wash them, they could often cover up their own smell of blood. This was also why Han Shuo's sensitive nose couldn't smell a trace of blood when he came close. The 2 blood-water demons came out of the deep well. Their blood shadows twisted in the air and covered Han Shuo and Phoebe like 2 blood clouds. Evil power suddenly filled Han Shuo and Phoebe. In an instant, Han Shuo felt the blood in his body boil as if he couldn't control it. Turning around, Han Shuo found that Phoebe was in an even worse state. 2 lines of blood were already flowing out of her nostrils, and her pretty face looked extremely wretched. Cursing inwardly, Han Shuo grabbed Phoebe and threw her outside with all his strength, shouting at the same time, "Leave this courtyard." Regardless of whether Phoebe agreed or not, her body had already been thrown out by Han Shuo. As a swordmaster, Phoebe had extraordinary strength. Han Shuo wasn't worried that she'd be injured from the fall. But facing 2 blood-water demons here, she likely wouldn't even have the chance to attack before dying from the loss of blood. The blood in his body started flowing uncontrollably towards his orifices. Han Shuo first brought out the Demon's Lair Edge against the blood-water demons, but the Demon's Lair Edge couldn't do any damage to the 2 blood-water demons at all as it whistled through the air and pierced into their bodies. Cutting water with a knife would make it flow even more. This was an ironclad fact. The blood-water demons' bodies were made of liquid. No matter how sharp the Demon's Lair Edge was, the blood-water demons would easily reform after being cut into pieces and wouldn't be harmed in the slightest. The bodies of the 2 blood-water demons reformed after they'd been severed and continued to move unhurriedly towards Han Shuo. With the characteristics of the blood-water demons, when they covered Han Shuo's body, they could instantly suck away all of Han Shuo's blood and turn Han Shuo into a desiccated corpse. As a demonic cultivator, the power contained within Han Shuo's blood wasn't something that an ordinary person or any other strong practitioner in this world could compare to. The 2 blood-water demons seemed to have sensed this as well and treated Han Shuo as a great tonic. They didn't care about Phoebe's departure at all. They didn't separate 1 blood-water demon to deal with Phoebe and instead focused on Han Shuo. This was an obvious indication of how much they valued Han Shuo. The blood in his body was in a frenzy as the magical yuan was doing its best to control the flow of blood out of his body. As his blood surged, the 2 forces restrained Han Shuo's body, making it hard for Han Shuo to move. However, the power of demonic yuan was also reflected at this moment. As a swordmaster, Phoebe was already bleeding profusely without any resistance. However, Han Shuo was able to use his demonic yuan to forcefully stop the blood from flowing out of his body. Although it was a bit difficult to resist, not a single drop of blood had flowed out of Han Shuo's body. The 2 greedy blood-water demons were finally about to reach Han Shuo. Han Shuo couldn't move and couldn't use his demonic yuan, so he could only use necromancy magic. Bone spears, bone arrows, and corpse explosion. Han Shuo released 1 necromancy magic after another, but the 2 blood-water demons remained completely unharmed. At this moment, Han Shuo suddenly understood that he could only harm the two blood water demons by burning them at high temperatures. It was a pity that all of his magical yuan was being used to stop his blood from flowing out, and he couldn't use the mystical glacial spell fire at all. Damn it, am I going to die at the hands of two blood water demons? I'm not resigned to this. Forget it, I'll use the mystical glacial spell fire to kill the two blood water demons even if I have to risk losing all of my blood. Now that the demon infant has formed, even if I lose all of my blood and body, I can still be reborn with the help of the demon infant. It'll just be a great blow to my vitality, but it'll be much better than dying now. Han Shuo made up his mind and then made up his mind to kill the two blood water demons even if he had to expend a great deal of his energy. At this moment, a mysterious connection suddenly came from the little skull, as if it could understand Han Shuo's thoughts. The little skull sent out a strand of consciousness, anxiously stopping Han Shuo's actions. There were no precise words, but the message was for Han Shuo to stop. Han Shuo could clearly feel it. Han Shuo, who'd been about to make a move, was momentarily stunned as his mind raced. The two blood water demons were only 5 or 6 meters away from Han Shuo. Han Shuo couldn't move and could only look forward, but he couldn't see any trace of the little skull. If he didn't make a move now, Han Shuo could be covered by the two blood water demons at any moment. All of his blood would be sucked dry in the blink of an eye, and his body would instantly lose all signs of life. The demon infant would likely be unable to escape the hands of the two blood water demons even if it left his body. His entire body and soul would be destroyed without a trace. The little skull's anxiousness made Han Shuo unsure if he should stop his plans. Seeing the two blood water demons gradually approach, Han Shuo sighed and made a decision that he didn't know was right or wrong. Trust him. A resolute look appeared in his starry eyes as Han Shuo threw all of his previous plans to the back of his mind. Han Shuo stood where he was and didn't take any action. He simply waited for the little skull's next move and gambled with his life. When the two blood water demons finally covered him, Han Shuo could no longer restrain the blood that he'd been controlling with his magical yuan. It surged out of his orifices like a tide. A deep sense of despair suddenly filled Han Shuo's heart. However, Han Shuo didn't feel any resentment towards the little skull. On the contrary, he felt that he trusted the little skull. There was nothing to regret even if he died this time. Suddenly, Han Shuo's rapidly flowing blood came to a sudden stop, as if the brakes had been slammed on. The mysterious power that controlled his blood also vanished in an instant. Han Shuo's magical yuan once again flowed unimpeded through his body, and his uncontrollable blood flow returned to normal. The two blood water demons in front of him, their featureless bodies, twisted and turned violently in front of his eyes. Han Shuo could tell from the violent twisting and struggling of the two blood shadows that they were trying to express their emotions, fear. After the power that controlled his blood had returned to normal, Han Shuo could move freely again. He raised his head and saw that the two blood shadows had been pierced by a few bone spikes. The little skull was looking at him with one of his empty eye sockets. He was crouching slightly, his two leg bones resting on the two blood water demons. 7 long bone spikes were deeply embedded in the bodies of the two blood water demons. Streaks of bloody light flowed down the 7 bone spikes like liquid and rapidly into the little skull's body. The 7 somewhat blunt bone spikes emitted a bewitching cold red light. The broken bones in front of the little skull's chest rearranged themselves at a speed visible to Han Shuo's naked eye, also flashing with a bloody red light. On the contrary, the two blood water demons that had been glowing with blood suddenly became dull and lifeless. All of the bewitching blood-red color seemed to be sucked in by the 7 bone spikes as they surged madly towards where the bone spikes were inserted. The blood-water demons of the two blood shadows gradually turned pale. Han Shuo could feel that the water energy that the two blood-water demons had absorbed for who knew how many years, along with the power of the blood of living beings, was rapidly flowing into the little skull's body. This state didn't last long. When the blood-water demons completely turned pale, there was a splash as their bodies turned into 2 puddles of water and splashed onto the ground. In an instant, the water vapor that had been shrouding the courtyard was blown away by a cold wind and completely disappeared. The afterglow was like blood as it shone down from the sky, giving the courtyard a bleak sense of beauty. Plop! The little skull that had been relying on the two blood water demons to stay in the air lost its footing and fell down due to the dissipation of the two blood water demons. The little skull reached out its hand and scratched its smooth skull. The hollow eyes of the little skull met Han Shua's eyes, and a sense of joy suddenly spread from the little skull's body into Han Shua's heart. Every bone on the little skeleton, which was originally as beautiful as fresh blood, was now flowing with a bright red brilliance. After a short while, the little skeleton's bones actually changed again, and finally became as white as jade. Ever since the little skull had been summoned by Han Shua, his entire skeleton had turned black and blood red due to the refinement of demonic arts. He hadn't expected it to change back to its original color. However, the bones on the little skull's body were now obviously different from the white color of normal skeletal warriors. His bones were translucent and as white as jade, and seemed to sparkle with a dazzling light under the sunlight. This made Han Shua feel a bit baffled. It was only now that Han Shua finally understood why the little skull had stopped in front of the shop and refused to leave. He must have been attracted by the blood water demons. Han Shuo remembered the last time he was at Bob Asher's slave farm in Valen City. The necromancer Clarendon of the Calamity Church had used blood to summon the three-eyed evil god. In the end, all the blood in the altar had been absorbed by the little skull. Perhaps it was because of this that the smell of blood on the blood water demons could be hidden from Han Shua, but not from the little skull. This was why the little skull had entered the shop of his own accord. As Han Shua was deep in thought, a strand of divine sense once again came from the little skull. This time, the little skull actually strongly requested to return to the other dimension, and Han Shua could feel his surging fighting spirit for revenge. After absorbing the power of the two blood water demons, the little skull had obviously changed. Not only had all the injuries from the fierce battle recovered, but it also seemed to have gained some other miraculous abilities, which was why he was so full of confidence. The little skull's fighting spirit and demands were very strong. Han Shua hesitated for a moment, thinking that it shouldn't be a problem if he was more careful in sensing it in the future. Thus, he used necromancy spells to send the little skull back to another mysterious plane. Chapter 195. The afterglow of the setting sun spilled into the courtyard. Apart from two puddles of water, there were no other traces of the well. The sound of hurried footsteps suddenly sounded from outside, quickly approaching. In the blink of an eye, a group of more than 10 people, including Phoebe, appeared in front of Han Shua. Her beautiful face was filled with worry as her bright eyes suddenly fell on Han Shua. Seeing that Han Shua was unharmed, her expression visibly relaxed, but she still didn't relax her grip on the long sword in her hand. Her fair neck turned to survey the surroundings, as if she wanted to see if there were any hidden dangers. Apart from Phoebe, there were 12 other Cairo mercenary band guards in full armor. It looked like they had been summoned by Phoebe. These 12 guards had vigilant looks in their eyes, looking around very cautiously. "Are you all right?" After looking around and seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary and that there was no danger, Phoebe let out a small breath of air and walked towards Han Shua to ask. Shaking his head, Han Shua gave Phoebe a surreptitious look before smiling and comforting her. "Don't worry, I'm fine." "I'm sorry, Mr. Harris. I think we must have been hallucinating. The danger that I spoke of earlier didn't appear." Receiving Han Shua's look, Phoebe understood that Han Shua must have taken care of the matter. An embarrassed expression appeared on her pretty face as she spoke to the cold-looking leader of the guards. This man was broad and robust, with a head of short brown hair that was messy. He held a double-edged battle axe in his right hand, and his body gave off the fierce aura of someone who had gone through a lot of killing. It was obvious that he had killed too many people. This shop was once cursed by an evil god. Every owner who has taken over this shop over the years has died a horrible death. Whether human or beast, as long as they accidentally enter this shop, they will be killed by the evil god's curse. There has never been an exception. No matter how you came in, I advise you to leave immediately. Harris's eyes roamed over Han Shua and Phoebe as he finally spoke coldly. He waved his hand and didn't wait for Han Shuo and Phoebe to say anything. A group of 12 Cairo mercenary band guards walked out of the courtyard with him, as if they didn't want to stay a moment longer. This Harris is a battle-hardened berserker and the vice-captain of the Cairo mercenary band. When I said that there was danger here, he came over reluctantly. It looks like there's something here that makes people wary. Even with my strength as a sword master, I didn't have any ability to resist. Phoebe briefly introduced Harris's identity after he left and then changed the topic. She stared at Han Shuo and said, "What's going on?" Smiling dashingly, Han Shuo reached out to touch the well and said happily, "The 2 blood water demons have been killed. There won't be any more strange occurrences happening here in the future. In addition, I'm going to buy this shop no matter how much gold I have to spend." With a face full of pleasant surprise, Phoebe looked at Han Shuo with bright eyes and said confidently, "Since you've said this, you must have enough confidence. Don't worry about the shop, I'll be in charge of negotiating with the Cairo mercenary band. I think a cursed place like this won't be worth much gold." Nodding, Han Shuo walked to Phoebe's side and reached out to hug Phoebe. He moved his mouth close to her ear and said softly, "Phoebe, thank you so much." Suddenly blushing, Phoebe hugged Han Shuo back and kissed Han Shuo lightly on the lips. She then put some distance between the two and looked directly at Han Shuo, saying emotionally, "You were the first to throw me out when danger approached. Brian, I should be the one thanking you." Not only had the danger of the blood water demons caused Phoebe to experience life and death, even Han Shuo had almost been scared out of his wits. After the great calamity, the two looked at each other and both felt a sense of appreciation for what they had now. Under the light of the setting sun, Phoebe's beautiful face looked even more beautiful. Her bright eyes sparkled with light, making Han Shuo want to lose himself in them. Tightening his grip, Han Shuo pulled Phoebe into his arms. Feeling Phoebe's body tremble slightly in close contact, Han Shuo's heart was filled with happiness. Before he'd come to this world, Han Shuo had been an ordinary person with evil intentions but no guts. His personality was kind but a bit cowardly. He hadn't done anything to be proud of in his 20 years of life, nor had he ever had a woman. He'd lived in mediocrity for 20 years. But under Chu Kanglin's scheme, he'd brought the memories of the demonic arts to this strange world. In a short period of time, Han Shuo had obtained great power, obtained a considerable sum of money, and had already won the hearts of 2 stunning beauties. The vicissitudes of life were always so unexpected. The extravagant hope that he'd only dared to imagine 20 years ago was quickly realized in such a short amount of time. This caused a feeling of disbelief to rise in Han Shuo's heart. Sometimes, Han Shuo even felt that everything that was happening now was like an unreal dream. However, the repeated dangers and pain reminded him that this wasn't an illusion. "All right, I think Emily must still be waiting for us. Let's hurry over." Sighing with emotion, Han Shuo couldn't help but speak softly to Phoebe as he watched the sunset glow fade away. The sky had already darkened. Seeming to greatly enjoy this moment of peace and tenderness, Phoebe gave a light and gently allowed Han Shuo to hold her soft little hand. The two walked shoulder to shoulder towards the location they'd agreed upon with Emily. Before long, Han Shuo and Phoebe appeared in front of the shop. Because the sky was already dark, there weren't any customers inside. When Han Shuo had just walked inside, a hale and hearty old man chuckled and asked, "Are you Lord Brian?" "I wouldn't dare call you Lord. You can just call me Brian." Han Shuo humbly bowed towards the old man and took out his dark mantle identity medallion, handing it to the old man with both hands. The old man took Han Shuo's iron medallion and glanced at it, returning it to Han Shuo with a smile. He then said a bit apologetically to Phoebe, "I'm sorry, Miss Phoebe, please wait here for a moment. The dark mantle has its rules. Apart from internal personnel, outsiders are not allowed inside." As the Hand of Darkness of Lancelot Empire, the dark mantle naturally had rules that everyone had to abide by. As an outsider, Phoebe being able to come together with Han Shuo was already an exception. Naturally, Phoebe couldn't be allowed inside. Phoebe didn't maintain her usual cold arrogance towards such a polite and amiable old man. She smiled and nodded, casually sitting down outside. "Let's go, I'll take you inside." The old man bowed slightly and led Han Shuo inside. After passing through a corridor, the old man stopped in front of the living room and pointed inside, saying, "Lord Emily is inside." As Han Shuo walked inside, the old man returned the way he'd come. It looked like he'd gone outside to continue looking after the shop. "Is that Brian?" Emily's voice suddenly sounded out of nowhere as soon as Han Shuo set foot in the living room. A large hole then automatically split open in the middle of the living room. It was similar to what Han Shuo and Emily had seen last time in Bob Asher's room in Valen City. After the hole opened up, Emily, who had changed into a lighter outfit, walked out slowly. There was a fireplace next to the living room and the temperature inside was quite moderate. Therefore, Emily didn't continue to wrap herself up tightly. "How is everything done?" Han Shuo walked towards Emily and asked with a smile after the hole had healed. "There's no problem. My brother will take over immediately. We've successfully completed this mission. Hee, do you want to know how much you've contributed this time?" Emily's beautiful face had a trace of mischievousness as she looked at Han Shuo with sparkling eyes. Emily's appearance was mature with a few traces of youthful naughtiness, giving her a seductive charm. Han Shuo's heart skipped a beat as his hands reached out dishonestly and pulled Emily, who was sitting on the other chair, into his broad chest. His hands roamed dishonestly over Emily's alluring and mature body as he chuckled, "Little hussy, I haven't settled the score with you for causing trouble in the tree hole earlier." Pumph. Raising her head, Emily glared at Han Shuo and said with a huff, "You still dare mention that matter? You actually dared to flirt with Phoebe in front of me in the dark. Do you even put me in your eyes? Don't think that I can't see because it's dark inside." Humph. Phoebe's panting was so loud and you guys still dared to pretend to be serious. He abruptly lifted Emily's legs and Emily, who had originally been in his arms, suddenly knelt on top of Han Shuo's thighs. Her round and plump buttocks stuck up high. As Emily cried out in alarm, Han Shuo's large hands landed on Emily's full and perky buttocks with a "papa" sound, causing Emily to beg for mercy under the pain. All right, I won't bother with you anymore, you big bastard." Emily cooperatively begged for mercy and suddenly said, "After this mission, you've gone from 3rd star to 1st moon. You've jumped a few ranks again." Han Shuo was startled and then stopped his messy movements. He looked at Emily in confusion. Sometimes, completing a few missions doesn't guarantee one's advancement by 1 star. Why did I jump so many ranks after completing just 1 mission? Did you pull some strings for me? Rolling her eyes at Han Shuo, Emily was exasperated and amused at the same time. "You should know that you're dealing with Bob Asher of the Griffin Legion. The difficulty of this kind of mission is completely different from gathering information and capturing 1 or 2 escaped nobles. Based on your contributions this time, it wouldn't be too much to promote you to 1st moon. It's just that you've only joined the Dark Mantle for less than half a year. It's too shocking that you've already become a 1st moon, so we didn't give you the status of 2nd moon." Han Shuo thought for a bit and understood after hearing Emily's words. He then remembered Chester's matter and said to Emily, "Right, Chester should still be in the Dark Mantle in Valen City. What kind of treatment did he receive?" "Thanks to you, he was promoted to a rank 4 envoy. That kid sure is smart. He was just passing on a message and he got such a good treatment. Even when I was doing missions back then, I didn't get such a good deal." Emily replied with a smile. "All right, when will Elaine and Belinda get here?" Han Shuo couldn't help but secretly rejoice for Chester when he heard that he'd received a reward as well. He then suddenly thought of Elaine and Belinda and couldn't help but ask, "I almost forgot if you didn't mention it. Belinda is an unexpected gain. If we send her to the Dark Mantle headquarters and interrogate the torture experts there, we'll be able to learn a lot about the Calamity Church. When the time comes, according to the value of the information from her mouth, we will be able to receive additional rewards." Emily giggled as she spoke joyfully. "All right, after advancing from a 3-star dark star to a 1-month dark moon, what kind of treatment can I enjoy?" Han Shuo thought for a bit and immediately asked. This was what he should be most concerned about at the moment. First, the amount of gold coins you receive every month will increase from 70 to 150. Of course, I don't think you'll care about these gold coins. Apart from this, you can use your current authority to obtain all kinds of information on the corresponding identities in every Dark Mantle stronghold. You can now use all the transportation matrices in every city of the Lancelot Empire without paying any gold coins. You can use your current status in any military organization in every city to mobilize no more than 100 soldiers to assist you in battle under special circumstances. Also, Han Shuo finally discovered after Emily's tireless explanation that all aspects of treatment had greatly improved after advancing from Dark Star to Dark Moon. The Dark Moon envoys already had so many privileges. The higher-ranked Dark Sun envoys and the 3 heavyweights of the Dark Mantle naturally enjoyed even more privileges. No wonder so many people wished to grasp power. It looked like this was indeed a good thing. Han Shuo couldn't help but sigh emotionally. Chapter 196. The Dark Mantle's secret stronghold definitely couldn't allow Phoebe to stay. Now that the relationship between Han Shuo and Phoebe was clear, he naturally needed to be with her. After feeding Emily and comforting her with a few words, Han Shuo and Phoebe finally left the place together, planning on finding their own hotel to stay in. Sunny Tanai had the most inns of all sizes. Because the majority of merchants and adventurers came and went, the various entertainment facilities weren't any less than in droll. Along the way, bright purple and red lights shone from the taverns onto the streets. Young girls dressed in either garish or pure attire stood on the streets, throwing flirtatious glances at passers-by with enchanting smiles and coaxing passers-by to enter. Han Shuo and Phoebe walked shoulder to shoulder, their eyes looking straight ahead, much to Phoebe's satisfaction. In actuality, this was because Han Shuo had just vented on Emily's well-rounded body. He naturally didn't have any nefarious thoughts when he came out immediately. After a while, Phoebe stopped in front of a luxuriously decorated hotel. She pulled Han Shuo with a small hand and led Han Shuo inside. When they arrived at the counter, the skinny owner smiled fawningly before Phoebe could open her mouth and said fawningly, "Honored Miss Phoebe, will you still choose that room this time?" Nodding her head, Phoebe's expression was cool as she took out her crystal card and handed it over, not saying anything else. From the owner's expression, Han Shuo knew that this definitely wasn't Phoebe's first time here. It looked like Phoebe must have visited many places in her travels to and fro with the Buzzed Merchant Guild. Taking out the crystal card and key, Phoebe turned her head and smiled faintly at Han Shuo. She grabbed Han Shuo's arm and walked inside. The interior of the hotel was comfortably warm, completely incomparable to the cold outside. Brilliant lights were hung along the corridors, illuminating the entire hotel. The solid wood floorboards were as bright as a mirror. Clear footsteps rang out as they stepped on them, the sound exceptionally pleasing to the ear. It looked like these floorboards were obviously not ordinary. Han Shuo hadn't noticed that Phoebe had arranged another room for him as he walked with Phoebe. He couldn't help but feel a bit of ambiguous anticipation as they walked deeper into the corridors. Could it be that Phoebe was planning on sharing a bed with him? As he thought of this, Han Shuo's eyes couldn't help but look at Phoebe beside him with a fiery gaze. All he saw was Phoebe's long brown hair cascading down naturally like a waterfall. As she walked, her hair fluttered gracefully over her fair cheeks and slender neck. Her eyebrows were curved like crescent moons, her skin was creamy, her eyes were bright like stars, and her lips were as red as a cherry dripping with water. It made one want to fiercely bite them. "Big pervert, what are you looking at?" Suddenly, Phoebe stopped in her tracks and rolled her eyes at Han Shuo with a slightly red face. Han Shuo's fiery gaze carried a strong desire to possess her. Phoebe wasn't a fool and naturally saw it clearly. She couldn't help but rebuke him in her panic. "No, nothing." Han Shuo straightened his expression and immediately concealed his lecherous gaze. He changed the topic and said, "Why aren't you walking?" "We're here. What are you thinking about? Can't you see the door is right in front of us?" Phoebe's bright eyes were filled with shyness and joy. She glared at Han Shuo and pointed at the door. Sure enough, he followed Phoebe's jade finger and discovered a tightly shut door. The corridor had also reached the end. It seemed that this should be the most secluded room. Nothing, I was just thinking about you. Han Shuo laughed evilly and raised his head to look directly at Phoebe. You stinking bastard, you only know how to use flowery words to coax me. Phoebe felt a sweetness in her heart as she shouted in a soft voice. No, I was indeed thinking about you just now. Han Shuo said, feeling wronged. Phoebe naturally wouldn't believe him. She flicked a glance at Han Shuo and said with a light snort, then you definitely weren't thinking in a good way. Look at your lecherous smile earlier. You must be thinking of some dirty thoughts. He really hadn't been thinking of anything good before. Phoebe had guessed correctly and Han Shuo could only laugh dryly. He then urged Phoebe, hurry up and open the door. I'm very tired after a busy day. Let's go in early to wash up and sleep. Phoebe didn't pursue the matter and took out the key to open the door. She moved to the side to let Han Shuo in and then locked the door from the back. There was a spacious hall in front of them with a soft carpet and large fur chairs. There were 4 rooms that had already been booked, including 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a storage room for miscellaneous clothes. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? Humph, there are 2 rooms here, one for each of us. If anyone dares to barge in the middle of the night, I'll stab him with my sword. Phoebe raised her head threateningly as she lit up the fireplace, causing the temperature in the room to slowly rise. Heh, I'm just afraid that someone who dares barge in will run into a beautiful woman's wet dreams and then take the initiative to throw himself into her arms. Han Shuo laughed evilly and exposed her. You damned bastard, you still dare mention this matter. Phoebe's face instantly flushed red as she flew in front of Han Shuo in a rage. Her slender, jade hands reached out and pinched the tender flesh on Han Shuo's waist. Han Shuo first cooperated with her by letting out a miserable shriek, then grabbed Phoebe in his arms and pressed his mouth against hers without the slightest trace of politeness. Amidst Phoebe's unrelenting whimpers, Han Shuo's tongue was like a dragon entering the ocean, wantonly swirling about. Phoebe symbolically struggled for a while before her delicate body gradually softened. Her jade hands that were originally pounding on Han Shuo's chest had unknowingly wrapped around Han Shuo's neck like a snake. Her small fragrant tongue secretly stuck out and entangled with Han Shuo's. Conveniently lying down on the soft carpet below, Han Shuo savored Phoebe's fragrant sweetness while reaching out to caress Phoebe's perky breasts. When Han Shuo's large hands finally covered Phoebe's soft breasts, Phoebe suddenly struggled and abruptly pushed Han Shuo away from her body. She then rolled her eyes at Han Shuo with a blushing face and said with seductive eyes, "It looks like I must be careful. Otherwise, if I'm not careful, you'll take all the advantages. Oh, after running around for such a long time, my body is about to stink. I need to take a quick shower, you just stay here obediently." As soon as she finished speaking, Phoebe rushed into the dressing room as if she was fleeing and slammed the door shut with a bang. Then, the sound of running water could be heard from inside. It looked like Phoebe was indeed in a hurry to wash off the dirt on her body. Dong dong dong. Dong dong dong. It was at this time that there was a sudden knock on the door. Han Shuo was startled and thought to himself that it couldn't be Emily who had come looking for him, could it? Walking towards the door with suspicion, Han Shuo opened the door and saw a large cluster of beautiful flowers. There were probably no less than 100 of them, and they exuded a delicate fragrance that gladdened the heart and refreshed the mind. Suddenly, the large cluster of flowers was removed and a handsome face appeared in front of Han Shuo. His eyebrows were like swords and his eyes were like stars. He had a wide forehead and a high nose bridge. Apart from his cheeks being a bit thin, this face could be called extraordinarily handsome. The handsome face that originally had a brilliant smile on it suddenly furrowed his eyebrows and was covered by a haze. He looked at Han Shuo with an unfriendly expression and said, "Who are you? Where's Phoebe?" "She's bathing inside. And who are you?" Han Shuo was stunned at first, but then he suddenly reacted. This person must be Phoebe's admirer and asked with an equally displeased expression, "Bathing? Then what are you doing here?" The person's face grew even uglier when he heard that Phoebe was bathing inside and Han Shuo was in this room. He suddenly cried out in surprise. "Oh, nothing much. I'm also staying here. If you don't have anything important, please don't disturb our rest." Han Shua's expression was cold as he flicked a glance at the person and said unhappily, "I'm the captain of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band, Florida. I'm Phoebe's good friend. Of course I have business with her, please don't block me." He glared angrily at Han Shua and almost roared lowly as a magical ripple emanated from his body. Han Shua was startled when he heard that this person was called Florida and the captain of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. He looked at this person with an additional trace of vigilance. Just like the Cairo Mercenary Band, the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band was also a very famous power in the Valley of Sunshine. However, most of the members were from the Lancelot Empire. A few years ago, the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band was the strongest in the Valley of Sunshine and had once been in charge of order here. However, the original leader of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band had met with misfortune during a battle against bandits, causing their decline. Florida was the current captain of the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. Ever since he'd taken charge of the band 2 years ago, he'd made it flourish with each passing day. The greatly weakened Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band had been revitalized in his hands, and it was said that they were now the Cairo Mercenary Band's greatest competitor. It was rumored that this person was a light archmage and seemed to have some connection to the Church of Light. His own strength was unfathomable and he was a straightforward person, but he was decisive when it came to killing. He never showed mercy to his enemies and had great prestige within the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. Who would have thought that such a person would be an admirer of Phoebe? When Han Shua learned of this person's identity, although he felt a bit of a headache, he wasn't afraid. He said coldly, "I'm sorry, I'm Phoebe's boyfriend. It's not convenient for Phoebe to see you at this time, please come again next time." Han Shua snorted coldly after speaking and slammed the door shut with a bang. Chapter 197. Florida was more domineering than Han Shua had imagined. He'd already sensed a dangerous magical pulse in the instant that Han Shua's door had closed. Han Shua's heart jumped in fright as he immediately took a step back. An explosive crack rang out as the room exploded into a ball of white light. Large pieces of wood flew into the air as Florida's handsome face once again appeared in front of Han Shua. He was still tightly clutching a bouquet of flowers in his left hand, but in his right hand was a staff embedded with red, yellow, and blue crystals, emanating strong magical pulses. "I said that I wanted to see Phoebe, didn't you hear me?" Florida looked at Han Shua with a cold expression as he spat out each word viciously. Florida was about the same age as the deceased Clark, around 26 or 27 years old. The two had many similarities, and both had great strength and handsome looks. However, although Clark's thoughts were vicious, he wouldn't display it so domineeringly. At least he understood that his status was noble and knew how to hide his emotions before making a move behind his back. This Florida, however, looked like a lawless person. His actions were even more brash and unbridled, as if he had no scruples. "I've also said that please don't disturb our rest." Han Shua snorted coldly as his body closed in on Florida like lightning. He gathered magical yuan into a fist and punched straight at Florida's handsome face. Han Shua's sudden move was obviously out of Florida's expectations. Panic immediately appeared on his face as he threw out the bouquet of flowers in his left hand, his body retreating rapidly at the same time. The punch that had gathered magical yuan caused the wind to howl as it pulverized the bouquet of flowers. The petals danced in the air as a sweet fragrance permeated the air. When the punch was about to land on Florida's handsome face, a strong magical pulse suddenly emanated from Florida's body. A brilliant, glazed magic shield suddenly enveloped Florida like an enormous light bulb. Bam! Han Shua's fist smashed into the magic shield and felt as if he'd punched a soft cotton ball. The magic shield twisted at the point of impact from Han Shua's punch, and a deep fist imprint appeared. Han Shua's tightly clenched fist stopped in front of Florida's high-nose bridge, unable to move any further. With a few thumping sounds, Florida turned pale with fright and retreated a few steps with his magic shield, increasing the distance between him and Han Shua. His breathing was a bit erratic, and his gaze towards Han Shua became even colder, as if Han Shua had become his mortal enemy. "You dare make the first move?" Florida's voice was as savage as his appearance as he glared angrily at Han Shuo. Han Shuo waved his outstretched fist and retracted it. Han Shuo pointed at the shattered door and said callously, "Your actions can be considered an invasion from the moment you broke the door." "I was only defending myself." Nodding with a cold smile, Florida looked coldly at Han Shuo and said, "Very good, you've got some guts. However, now that we've pulled apart, you won't have the chance to approach me again. Now let me see just how much skill you have." Florida took another few steps back after he'd spoken and raised the magic staff in his right hand, intending to officially fight Han Shuo. Han Shuo also solemnly took out the Demon's Lair edge from his space ring when he saw Florida's actions, preparing to deal with Florida's attack. This person was a light archmage and his strength was certainly out of the ordinary. Han Shuo had tested him just now and discovered that Florida's reactions and movements were nimble. It looked like he was an expert who'd gone through hundreds of battles. Han Shuo hadn't been able to hurt Florida when the two had been so close before. Now that there was some distance between them, Florida would be able to make use of his strengths as a mage and would definitely be difficult to deal with. At this moment, hurried footsteps rapidly approached from the distance. Just as Han Shuo and Florida were about to make their move, Vice Chief Harris of the Cairo mercenary band, who they'd met in the shop in the place of extreme water, quickly approached with a few guards. "Isn't this Chief Florida? Why aren't you staying with the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band? Why are you causing trouble in the property protected by the Cairo mercenary band?" Harris's voice was full of faint mockery and was as cold as it had been during the day. The sound of water splashing in the washroom suddenly stopped at this moment. It looked like Phoebe, whose hearing had been affected by the sound of water in the shower, had finally discovered the commotion outside after all the noise just now. Florida, who had been hostile towards Han Shuo, turned his head to look at Harris when he heard Harris's voice. He put away the magic staff in his hand and said with a cold expression, "I'm here to see Miss Phoebe. I hadn't thought that I'd be blocked outside by a blind brat. If you're here to manage the hotel's business, then I welcome you on behalf of the owner. However, I hope that you don't try to make a move here or our Cairo mercenary band will definitely intervene. You've stayed in the glorious Suntanai for so long, you must know the rules of the glorious Suntanai." Harris snorted coldly when he saw Florida put away his magic staff. "Count yourself lucky today," Florida said coldly to Han Shuo and then turned to walk out. He stopped next to Harris and said with his back to Han Shuo, "I'll regain control of the Valley of Sunshine before long. I won't be as polite to you then." Florida laughed wildly after he'd finished speaking and walked out with large strides. He actually didn't stay here and wait for Phoebe to come out. Harris's face was ugly as the veins on his forehead bulged. He looked like he'd go berserk at any moment. Han Shuo knew that Harris was a berserker. It was said that a berserker's strength was quite astonishing to begin with, and they could also use a mysterious method to go berserk. Their strength would continue to increase explosively after going berserk, and they possessed unbelievable destructive power. Seeing Harris's current appearance, Han Shuo really hoped that he'd suddenly go berserk and be unable to suppress the rage in his heart, immediately attacking Florida to the death. It was a pity that Harris quickly returned to normal after his initial rage and didn't fulfill Han Shuo's wishes. He flicked a cold glance at Han Shuo and said, "You'll have to compensate for the door here. Florida has great power in the Valley of Sunshine, so be careful since you've offended him. You can come find us if you need anything from the Cairo mercenary band." Although his expression was still cold, perhaps because they had a common enemy, Harris's attitude towards Han Shuo had changed a bit. There was even a hint of concern in his words. Han Shuo hadn't planned on compensating for the door because it was Florida who damaged it. However, Harris's attitude had changed now, and Han Shuo also needed to obtain the shop with the place of extreme water through the Cairo mercenary band. Therefore, he smiled readily and said, "No problem." Nodding his head, Harris didn't say anything else. He waved his hand and left with his guards. The washroom door creaked open after Harris left and Phoebe walked out in a bathrobe like a lotus flower emerging from the water. Her long, wet hair hung loosely over her shoulders, revealing a small patch of rosy white skin. Her red lips were moist and full as she quickly glanced at the door. She exhaled lightly and said to Han Shuo, "They've all left." "They've all left. What's with that, Florida?" Han Shuo swept a glance over Phoebe and asked with an unhappy expression. Chuckling lowly, Phoebe pulled up her bathrobe and wrapped it tightly around her slender body. She walked to Han Shuo's side and blinked her wet eyelashes as she looked at Han Shuo with interest. She said teasingly, "What, jealous?" "Yes, I'm jealous. That brat looks all high and mighty and even brought a bunch of fresh flowers to look for you. He even dared to ask me, his boyfriend, to move out of the way. I'm not in a good mood right now." Han Shuo was quite frank as he looked directly at Phoebe and spoke with displeasure. Her body softened as Phoebe sat directly on Han Shuo's lap and giggled softly before explaining, "I often come to the Valley of Sunshine and have done business with the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band. However, he's always pursued me and I don't have any relationship with him." "Haha, all right, don't be angry. I'll explain things clearly to him next time I see him and tell him to stop bothering me in the future. Is that okay?" "There's no point in explaining. I don't think this brat is the magnanimous type. I didn't like him from the first time I saw him, but I think he feels the same way about me. I think the grudge between us has been sown." Han Shuo shook his head and said to Phoebe, "Then what do we do? The Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band is quite powerful in the Valley of Sunshine and is only second to the Cairo Mercenary Band. It's said that the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band has been recruiting even more recently. Through some unknown method, they've even invited a group of experts from the Church of Light. They seem to want to replace the Cairo Mercenary Band's position in the Valley of Sunshine. It'll be very troublesome if Tanai offends them in the Valley of Sunshine." Phoebe was startled and said with a bit of worry, "We'll deal with it as it comes. He's not the only one in the Valley of Sunshine right now. I don't believe he can do anything to me." Han Shuo snorted coldly and said fearlessly. Chapter 198. Florida's appearance had caused the door to shatter. The two of them had no choice but to switch rooms and pay 20 gold coins for the damaged door. This time, Phoebe had asked for 2 rooms, so Han Shuo no longer had the opportunity to steal her beauty. When Phoebe returned to her room to rest, Han Shuo didn't remain idle either. Han Shuo found the cupboard in this room and set up the transportation matrix. He then adjusted his mental strength and released a dark mist spell in the cupboard before walking into the transportation matrix. The cemetery of death was as cold and desolate as ever. When Han Shuo walked out, he saw that the enormous Gilbert had revealed his true form and was sleeping amidst the pure white bones. He didn't notice Han Shuo's arrival at all. After 2 days of rushing about, Gilbert had shouldered a heavy responsibility. His body had once again been injured and should be truly tired. Han Shuo didn't disturb him and went to the place where the Earth Elite Zombie and Yin demons were being refined. First, Han Shuo channeled magical yuan into the Yin demon cave. When Han Shuo discovered that there were only 9 wraiths left in the Yin demon cave and that they were still fighting each other day and night, he understood that the day of harvesting Yin demons was getting closer and closer. The Earth Elite Zombie in the place of Extreme Earth exuded an enormous aura of life. The Earth Chi that surrounded the entire cemetery of death was becoming thinner and thinner. Clouds of gray aura enveloped the center of the place of Extreme Earth, as if a large hand was gripping it tightly and slowly pulling it in. A mysterious connection came from the center of the place of Extreme Earth. Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment before a wave of joy suddenly surged into his heart. When he carefully sensed it, Han Shuo discovered that this joy came from the Earth Elite Zombie buried deep underground. It seemed that Han Shuo's arrival had made the Earth Elite Zombie feel joy. After absorbing the Earth Chi in the place of Extreme Earth for such a long time, in addition to the nourishment of the precious materials that Han Shuo had spent a huge amount of money to purchase, the Earth Elite Zombie was no longer a simple zombie warrior. He already had the most instinctive senses. Han Shuo had found the 3 places of Extreme Earth, Wood, and Water. With the help of Phoebe's trading company, Han Shuo was confident that he could purchase enough materials to refine the Earth, Wood, and Water Elite Zombies. As long as these 3 types of zombies were formed, the the strength of Han Shua's body would greatly increase. If he could also find the places of extreme metal and fire together, Han Shua would possess a terrifying demonic formation when he gathered the 5 elemental zombies. When that time came, he would have even more right to speak in this world. Seeing that everything was normal here, Han Shua didn't wake up Gilbert and silently returned to the inn in the Valley of Sunshine. After climbing onto the bed, Han Shua sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. His entire body relaxed as he slowly sank into a meditative state, not relaxing at all to increase his mental strength. Phoebe came over early the next morning. Her originally straight hair had been tied up high, and her sky-blue dress set off Phoebe's temperament even more elegant. She naturally came over and grabbed Han Shua's arm. Phoebe pulled Han Shua outside and said, "Let's go, we'll continue strolling around the Valley of Sunshine today and try to collect all the materials you need." Han Shua gladly agreed. He'd originally only been collecting materials to refine the Wood Elite Zombie, but because of the discovery of the place of extreme water, Han Shua had started to prepare the materials he needed to refine the Water Elite Zombie in advance. As the border between the 3 kingdoms, the Valley of Sunshine was filled with an endless stream of merchants. All sorts of strange goods could be found here. When Han Shua and Phoebe searched patiently, they indeed found quite a few materials they needed. The noon sun shone down on the Valley of Sunshine, bathing the entire valley in sunlight. It was so warm that it made people feel very comfortable. Walking out of a shop, Phoebe rubbed her lower abdomen and smiled sweetly at Han Shua. "I'm a bit hungry. Let's find a place to get something to eat first." "You're familiar with this place. Just take me to where there's delicious food," Han Shua replied with a smile. It was said that when a demonic arts practitioner reached a certain level, they could live for hundreds of years without eating or drinking. They didn't need to use grains to nourish their body. However, Han Shua hadn't reached this level yet. Besides, food was also a form of enjoyment for Han Shua, apart from replenishing his body's energy. Phoebe led the way in front and the two walked into a small shop. A few dwarves about 1 meter tall walked out and politely welcomed Han Shua and Phoebe to their seats. This shop wasn't very big, and the decorations inside weren't luxurious either. There were only a few simple chairs, but it was packed with people. A few merchants wearing luxurious fur coats and sparkling diamond rings on their fingers sat lazily on the tables and chairs that weren't very spacious, wolfing down the food on their plates without a care for their image. Han Shua and Phoebe sat down at a table for 2 by the window. Phoebe didn't ask for Han Shua's opinion, and directly instructed a dwarf next to her, "Bring the best food in the shop." The dwarf smiled faintly and bowed courteously, then quickly left Phoebe and Han Shua's side. He was probably busy with something. Dwarves are really a strange race. Some dwarves are skilled at forging ironware, some are skilled at brewing fine wine, and some love to cook. When they fall in love with their craft, they can always bring some incredible masterpieces to people. The dwarves in this shop come from a remote mountain range in Kasi Empire. The joy of their life is to cook all kinds of delicious food. The food made by their hands is simply unforgettable, Phoebe explained to Han Shua with a smile. Han Shua, who came from another world, had enjoyed the influence of China's culinary culture. After tasting some of the food in this world, he always felt that the difference between the food here and the extensive and profound culinary culture of China was simply not small at all. To be honest, Han Shua really didn't believe that the food here would be more exquisite and tasty than what Han Shua had eaten in hotels before. Therefore, he didn't hold much hope and just smiled in response to Phoebe's words. The business here was very good. From the number of customers and their status, it could be seen that the extravagant customers didn't dislike the small size of this place. In particular, Han Shua could tell from the way some of the elegant noblewomen ate that they really did enjoy the food on their plates. While Han Shua and Phoebe were chatting with smiles, the dwarf who had just left carried 2 large plates of strange food and gently placed them in front of Han Shua and Phoebe. It looked like a strange kind of meat cooked to a glossy color. A strange aroma wafted into Han Shua's mouth and nose, surprising Han Shua. On the other side, Phoebe held a knife and fork in front of Han Shua and had already started chewing. Looking at her appearance, it was obvious that she really enjoyed this kind of food. When Han Shuo tried to cut a piece of meat and put it in his mouth, his brows suddenly relaxed. Then, his mouth was filled with a wonderful feeling, like a kind of mysterious magic. The delicious taste of the food continuously lingered in Han Shuo's heart, mouth, and nose without dissipating. With his appetite greatly awakened, Han Shuo, who had just taken a small bite, immediately began to chew heartily, wolfing down the food on his plate. When his stomach was slightly bloated, Han Shuo burped and praised, "It's really good. No wonder there are so many people trying to squeeze into this small store." "Friend, we meet again." At this moment, Florida walked in from the entrance. Florida, wearing a white magic robe, stood in front of the door and looked coldly at Han Shuo. Phoebe, who was still enjoying the food on her plate, raised her head to look at Florida when she heard this. She then waved her hand to call the little dwarf over and threw a bag of gold coins on the table. She stood up and said to Han Shuo, "Let's go out." Han Shuo's expression was indifferent as he waved his hand and said to Phoebe, "I have nothing to talk about with him. Just tell him directly. If he continues to pester me and won't let go, I'll be more than happy to keep him company." After yesterday's exchange, Han Shuo understood that Florida's strength was indeed unfathomable. However, Han Shuo now possessed both magic and necromancy magic. He also had the mysterious little skull, the Earth Elite Zombie, and the 3 demons on the verge of forming. With all of these strengths added together, Han Shuo wasn't afraid of Florida at all. With his magic rapidly improving every day, Han Shuo didn't need to lower his head in front of anyone. Phoebe started slightly when she heard Han Shuo's words, then smiled sweetly and said, "I understand." Slowly moving, Phoebe got up and walked towards Florida. The smile she'd just shown to Han Shuo was replaced by cold arrogance when facing Florida. When they arrived at the door, Phoebe pointed at Han Shuo and said to Florida, "He's my boyfriend, I think we have nothing to say. Business is business, but you don't have the right to interfere in my life. I hope you won't disturb me in the future." Although he'd long since been mentally prepared, when Florida heard Phoebe's blunt words with his own mouth, he was still momentarily absent-minded. Different from how he treated Han Shuo, when Florida faced Phoebe, the rigid lines on his face became very gentle. Even his voice was abnormally gentle as he stared closely at Phoebe and said, "Where did this brat come from? What can he bring to you? Why did you choose him?" "Sorry, this matter has nothing to do with you. I hope you take care of yourself." Phoebe's expression was cold as she spoke in an equally cold voice. Nodding, Florida laughed ruefully and looked at Phoebe and Han Shuo in the distance. He said, "All right," 3 times in a row, then suddenly turned around and left. "Please, bring another plate of the same food." Han Shuo snorted coldly and then said to the dwarf beside him with a smile. Chapter 199. After filling their stomachs and walking out of the dwarven food store, Phoebe and Han Shuo strolled through all of Glorious Sunshine Tanai's stores for a while. Phoebe then went to find the Cairo mercenary band to purchase the store with the place of extreme water for Han Shuo. Han Shuo headed to the store that Emily was at alone, planning to find Emily and probe Florida's background. The old man was still standing guard at the door. This store was selling armor for knights from the Lancelot Empire. Because the sky hadn't darkened yet, there were a few people dressed like knights in the hall, shopping for knights' clothing. When the old man saw Han Shuo walk in, he smiled and gestured to Han Shuo, pointing to the courtyard in the back. Han Shuo understood and pretended to pick out the knight's clothing. He walked in through the door that led to the courtyard in the back. "How did you provoke Florida?" When Han Shuo asked Emily with a cold expression on his face, Emily was obviously taken aback and responded with a question of surprise. "Apart from the information that everyone already knows, do you have any other information about him? I know that the Dark Mantle must have information that no one knows about him." Han Shuo looked at Emily and said. Emily's brow furrowed slightly as she looked intently at Han Shuo. "Just what is going on?" Han Shuo briefly explained what had happened last night to Emily. Emily then said angrily, "I've long since heard that this Florida is arrogant and conceited, but who would have thought that he's actually this domineering? The Valley of Sunshine isn't even under the control of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band now, yet he dares be so arrogant. Han Shua's somewhat displeased mood suddenly improved a bit when he saw that Emily was also angry. He then said gently, "Just what is this Florida's background?" The glorious Sun Tanai is a dark mantle stronghold. Their main mission is to collect the materials here. Florida isn't from our Lancelot Empire, nor is he from Kasi Empire. He comes from a vassal state of our Lancelot Empire. His grandfather is Grand Magus Ferguson of the Church of Light. His status in the Church of Light is very high, and it's said that he has great hopes of becoming a sacred magus. Florida grew up in the Church of Light and was personally taught magic by his grandfather. In addition to light magic, he also studied lightning magic. This was a secret that most people didn't know. With his grandfather's guidance and his own extraordinary talent, he had become an archmage 3 years ago at such a young age. The Dark Mantle had once paid close attention to him, believing that he would become one of the super experts on the continent in the future. However, Florida didn't join the Church of Light. He suddenly left the church a few years ago and went to the Valley of Sunshine, joining the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. Because of his great strength, he'd won the trust of the leader of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band, Jason, in an extremely short amount of time. Jason had even entrusted his only daughter to him, but during a battle against bandits, old Jason had accidentally died in battle, and his daughter had also gone missing. It's said that this matter seemed to have something to do with Florida, but no one had any evidence to prove this. After Jason's death, Florida naturally took control of the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band. Unfortunately, because some people suspected that this matter had something to do with Florida, some core members angrily withdrew from the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band and the Valley of Sunshine, allowing the Cairo mercenary band to grow. However, the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band has indeed developed quite well in Florida's hands. Their originally damaged strength has gradually recovered, and they've become the Cairo mercenary band's greatest opponent this year. Perhaps this time, the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band will truly be able to regain control of the Valley of Sunshine in Florida's hands. Emily creased her brow in thought as she tirelessly recounted Florida's information. When Emily had finished, Han Shua said lowly, "He's a strong opponent, all right. This person's heart is sinister, and he even dares to attack his benefactor without mercy. This kind of method is completely different from the Church of Light's principles. It looks like I must be careful. Brian, the Valley of Sunshine is different from other places. It's not bound by any country at all, and whoever has the most power here calls the shots. I know that your strength isn't necessarily weaker than Florida's, but Florida has the Rainbow Sickle mercenary band in his hands. 2 fists can't fight 4 hands. As long as you're in glorious Tanai, I don't think he'll dare make a move with the Cairo mercenary band keeping you in check. However, it's best if you don't go out rashly, otherwise he'll find a chance to make a move." Emily was obviously very wary of Florida as she comforted Han Shua. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Han Shua's expression was calm as he responded lowly. He paused and said to Emily, "Right, it's been so long, why hasn't Elaine brought Belinda over yet? I've left a drop of blood essence on Belinda, so she won't be able to cause trouble at all. Did something happen along the way?" Emily shook her head with a wry smile when she heard Han Shua's words. She responded, "I'm also worried. Logically speaking, Elaine should have arrived in Tanai by now. Did something really happen?" "Forget it, I'll leave for a bit and search along the way," Han Shua said after thinking for a bit. "No, you've offended Florida. It's best if you don't leave the Valley of Sunshine for now. That person has great power in this area and won't let you off if he knows that you've left the Valley of Sunshine." Emily's expression grew panicked as she stopped Han Shua. "Nothing will happen. It's not like you don't know my senses. I'll immediately leave once I detect danger. In addition, I've planted a drop of blood essence in Belinda's body. Only I can sense her location within a certain distance. I must make this trip in order to achieve a perfect result for this mission." Han Shua smiled lightheartedly and didn't take Florida's threat to heart at all as he spoke with great ease. "Since you're so insistent, then I'll go with you," Emily said resolutely to Han Shua when she saw that she couldn't convince Han Shua. Shaking his head, Han Shuo declined Emily's suggestion and turned to walk outside. With his back to Emily, he said lowly, "Emily, you should believe in me and not treat me like a child, planning everything for me. This isn't the life I want. If Florida really does make a move, I'll actually look forward to it." Emily had already set off, but she finally sighed when she heard Han Shuo's words. "Alright, but you have to be careful. Elaine and Belinda's lives aren't as important to me as you are. You have to remember to protect yourself first." "I will," Han Shuo said. The sky had already gradually darkened when he walked out of the shop. Most of the shops in the Valley of Sunshine had already closed their doors at this time, replaced by the bright neon lights of entertainment. Han Shuo turned a blind eye to the crude and vulgar cries around him as he strode towards the fences leading into the valley. Some procedures were needed to enter the Valley of Sunshine, but nothing was needed to leave. No one questioned Han Shuo when he left, but the Cairo mercenary band knight who had come last time looked at Han Shuo with some surprise. He seemed to find it strange that the two beauties beside Han Shuo hadn't left with him. Han Shuo's sensitive senses detected that there were people spying on him when he walked out of the Valley of Sunshine, but he didn't pay too much attention to them. There was no need to think too much. Those spying on him were either the Rainbow Sickle Mercenary Band or the Cairo Mercenary Band. It wouldn't be difficult for Han Shuo to shake them off, and he had ample confidence in himself. Han Shuo had been walking slowly when he left the valley, but his speed suddenly increased several times. Under the dark sky, Han Shuo's figure was as swift as a shooting star that occasionally streaked across the sky. He'd already traversed several hundred meters in the span of a few breaths, pulling far away from those spying on him. When the feeling of being spied on disappeared, Han Shuo suddenly soared into the air and flew close to the lush silver treetops, heading straight for the road from Valen City. With a single thought, the mysterious power of the demon infant circulated in a bizarre manner. Waves of mysterious power spread out from the demon infant, like ripples in the water, covering the far distance. The demon infant and the blood essence had a mysterious connection. As long as Han Shuo was within 1,000 meters of him, Han Shuo would be able to immediately sense the appearance of the blood essence. As Han Shuo calmed his mind and focused on using the demon infant to sense the blood essence, a strange feeling suddenly leapt into his mind. Han Shuo suddenly sensed the presence of life, some large and some small. The feeling suddenly disappeared after Han Shuo's heart trembled. Startled, Han Shuo once again calmed his mind and focused, carefully comprehending the feeling that had suddenly surged into his mind. Han Shuo then discovered that the life auras belonged to the insects and small beasts that had fallen into hibernation beside him. Although they were somewhat indistinct, Han Shuo was still shocked by this discovery. The demon infant suddenly moved slightly at this moment, and Han Shuo sensed the location of the blood essence in the next moment. The overjoyed Han Shuo abruptly sped up in the air, flying rapidly in the direction of the blood essence. However, when Han Shuo arrived at his destination, he saw Elaine lying beneath a large tree, covered in blood. Her neck was bent unnaturally, as if someone had forcibly broken it. Her body seemed to have been struck by wind blade magic, as bone-deep wounds tore through her clothes. Her blood mixed with the snow and melted into a pool of blood. It looked like she died not long ago. Suddenly, Han Shuo felt a strong sense of danger. Han Shuo was startled and immediately retreated in an attempt to distance himself from Elaine's corpse. Welcome to Immortal Cultivation Audiobooks, your gateway to the mystical world of Xianxia. Dive into legendary tales of martial arts, spiritual growth, and immortal ascension. Here, we bring you full-length English audiobooks of the best Wuxia and Xianxia stories, from young prodigies to ancient sect wars. Perfect for fans of Against the Gods, Martial World, and tales of demons and gods.